Jace, thank you so much for coming to speak at our meeting.
Well, great. Thanks for having me. Yeah, so I'm a reserve director at the Mission Aransas National Estuarine Research Reserve, and it's a research and education program within the University of Texas Marine Science Institute. And so we have a staff of about 20. We do all kinds of water quality projects, look at vegetation changes in the marsh, birds. We have a sea turtle rehab center as well. But one of the projects we have is a citizen science project called Nurdle Patrol that we started up in 2018. And so that's what I'm going to go into detail about. So if you haven't ever heard of a nurdle, after this presentation, you'll know everything there is to know about them. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And can y'all see that okay? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so let's see. Let me go to the next one here. Okay, so in general, before I get into what nurdles are and how they get into the environment and some of the impacts and then what we're doing about it, first I'll just generally talk to you about microplastics. And so microplastics are plastics that are smaller than 5 millimeters. And really there's two different types. We consider there's primary and secondary. Secondary are plastic products that you buy at the store. They're released to the environment somehow. And then they break down over time and they just crunch up into little bitty pieces less than 5 millimeters. And so those, it's hard to figure out where they're coming from, what they actually were when they were a product. So we're not going to be talking about the secondary. We're going to be talking about the primary and specifically the plastic pellets. And most people, even in the plastics industry, they don't call them nurdles. They call them PE or PPE, all the different acronyms that they have for plastics. But in the environmental side of things, once they're in the environment, they call them nurdles. And I didn't come up with that name. It was from the early 1990s. Somebody in Europe came up with it, according to Wikipedia. Nurdles are, like I said, small plastic pellets. Formosa Plastics makes them there. Maybe some of y'all work for Formosa, so probably know a lot more about plastics than I do. But they're manufactured, then they're shipped all around the world. They're shipped by rail, by truck, also by, they bag them up, put them on pallets and ship them all over the world on a ship. They can be released to the environment at any one of those stages. And so, at the manufacturing site, there can be spills when they're unloading or offloading pellets. There can be spills during transportation. And then also once they're wherever they're delivered to be melted down and made into a product, they can also be spilled at that point. And so it's an entire value chain issue, not just the manufacturing site. So what we found with Nurdle Patrol is that these things come in all shapes and sizes and colors. And so you'll see down here at the bottom right, there's square ones, oblong, flat, all different shapes and sizes, and they can actually be different colors too. And we have some researchers here that look at the weathering of these nurdles. And so you'll see this girl here, that's my daughter, Parker. She's holding up a nurdle and some tweezers. That one's kind of opaque, but as they're in the sun, UV light, they start turning yellow. And so it's a resin, so they start turning yellow, just like a surfboard or boat or something like that would as well. And so we got researchers here that are looking at how much time does it take to turn like a polyethylene pellet yellow. And so they have this machine that they put salt water on it, heavy UV light. And so 1 month is like 20 years of being out into the environment. And so they've done 100 years of looking at these. So they can try, the point is to try to age how old the ones are that we're finding. This is kind of a visual of what I just talked to you about. So, along railroads is pretty typical to find nurdles, not as many as what this guy's holding in his hand here. That's obviously a spill, but we've done over 80 surveys along railroads in multiple states across the country. And you always find, nurdles along them. And so we know that they're spilling all along the way. And then the middle image here is the corrugated 6-inch tube that hooks up to pneumatically blow the pellets into a rail car. Whenever that nozzle's hooked up or taken off, pellets can spill out. And so, one of the basic best management practices is to put a tub under there to catch those nurdles. And then, of course, what's less likely to happen, but even last summer one happened, was a major spill off of a ship. So a container falls overboard, breaks open, and then all that white stuff in the ocean there that you see is pellets that are coming out of bags. And so Sri Lanka was the latest spill that happened, and that was last summer, where they had something like 80 containers open up, and they were waist deep in pellets on their beach. And Sri Lanka is a tourism type place. Plastic pellets in the environment, we've known it's been a problem for decades. This is a report that the Environmental Protection Agency came out with back in 1992 called Plastic Pellets in the Aquatic Environment. And in there, they list about 80 species of shorebirds that they knew about at the time that were consuming these pellets. If you look in the middle of that, what looks like a book there, there's a black and white photo, and that's the intestinal tract of a shorebird. And so there's about 10 pellets or so in there. So most likely what happens is if an animal eats a pellet, it probably just passes it through, no big deal. It's whenever there's a large amount of pellets that they can get clog their intestinal tract, or they can twist their intestinal tract up, then they can't consume normal food and they end up starving to death. Like I said, there was 80 species that they knew about in 1992. We now know there's hundreds of species. There's been lots of studies done showing different types of birds, fish, and sea turtles that eat these pellets because they look like food. They look like fish eggs or seeds. The other issue with these is they can absorb harmful chemicals. So you probably heard of like PCBs out of light fixtures, PAHs from the cars, DDT, which is banned in the US, but like they still use it in Mexico. Those can absorb and have really high concentrations on the outside of these pellets. And so one thing we worry about is the human health side of things, which we don't have an answer for yet, but you think about fish that eat these, like a redfish or something. Do the chemicals come off of the nurdle, go through the stomach lining and into the muscle tissue that then we're eating? We don't have those answers yet, but there are some researchers that are looking at that. And so, maybe in a couple of years, we'll have the answer to that. But the problem is that we as humans and even the fish, we're exposed to so many other things besides, what's on the nurdle, that it would be very difficult to be able to say that the chemicals coming from the nurdle are impacting human health. And so we're very careful about what we say there. So there was a spill here in Corpus Christi in 2018 on the beach. And so we called the Coast Guard, who then called the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality to come out, take samples, and see if they could do something about it. Well, they called me back a couple of days later, and they said they couldn't do anything about it because they didn't know where the spill came from. So there was nobody to pay for the spill, pay for the cleanup. They don't know how to clean plastic pellets up off the beach. So that was another issue. It wasn't like, oil that spilled where they have protocols and stuff for cleaning that up. And then they thought that it could have been from another country, or it could have been, offshore ship or something like that. So I said, well, you're going to monitor to see how long these are going to be on our beach and how far they spread, right? And they said they don't have the manpower for that, which is understandable. So we created a Facebook page called Nurdle Patrol, and we wanted citizen scientists to go out on Mustang and North Padre Island, which is about a 40-mile stretch of beach, to see how long these pellets would be out there and how far they spread. Well, within about a couple of weeks after starting that Nurdle Patrol Facebook page, we had about 300 people sign up to there, and there was groups in every state in the US, on the Gulf of Mexico, including Mexico itself, and in the Yucatan Peninsula. So with that, it sort of kind of blew up into what it is now. But we started this to have a very simple methodology of going out along the shoreline, either the beach, a creek or river or a bay shoreline, and look for 10 minutes for nurdles. And you go at the water line first. If you're at the beach, we say the anywhere in the high tide area within the last 24 hours, which is usually the wet part of the beach. But if you look along the rack line, which is where all the sticks and everything are, and you move those around, typically that's where you're going to find the nurdles. And so you go out for 10 minutes, you go by your hand only, you start your clock when you find your first nurdle. Then after 10 minutes, you count how many you have, and then you go to nurdlepatrol.org, and there's a reporting page where you say where you were at, how many nurdles you found, how many volunteers you had with you, and how long you looked. And it automatically goes to a map. And I'm going to show you some of those maps because it visually helps show how bad the problem is and the places where it's not. I mean, we ask people, if you don't find anything, put a 0, because that's helpful information as well. We ended up getting the methodology published in Marine Pollution Bulletin for a couple of reasons. One, it helps researchers know that the data was collected accurately, because we have a couple of ways that we do quality assurance on the data that comes in to nurdlepatrol.org. Like people have to take a picture of what they found. You'd be surprised. A lot of people find seeds and they try to count those as nurdles. So we go in and we have to delete that information. But then the other reason we got this was for litigation. So there's been a couple of groups that have used the Nurdle Patrol data in lawsuits and have won. South Carolina is a real good example of that. They just last summer won $1 million to go towards water quality projects in their area, and it was a distributor of nurdles that was washing down their spills right into the harbor of Charleston Harbor there in South Carolina. So that's a good way of showing that this could be used. So say you do your 10-minute survey, you go put your information in. This is what, if you zoomed out to the United States, this is what the data looks like currently. And you'll notice in Florida, they have a lot of greens on that West Coast, and the greens are 0 nurdles. So these are concentrations for one person for 10 minutes. And so the further you go west in the Gulf of Mexico, you'll notice that those colors start getting warmer, and the warmer the color, the higher the concentration, to where when you get to purple, you get over 1,000 pellets in 10 minutes for one person. That's a lot of nurdles. And so normally what you find, like along the Texas coast, I was at the beach all day today doing turtle surveys, but I also did nurdle surveys when I was out there. And I found 35 in 10 minutes. And that's pretty typical to find that almost any beach you go to in Texas. So you can see the hot spots here, definitely in the Mississippi River. And that was because they had a spill 2 years ago, and a barge had a container that spilt overboard, and Dow chemical bags fell out. Some of the bags just washed up, but a lot of them broke open, and the shoreline was littered with pellets. And then Houston, where that's the highest concentration of plastic manufacturing sites around the country. So let's zoom into Texas here. You'll see a lot of reds. Reds are over 100 in 10 minutes, 100 to 1,000 in 10 minutes. The main thing to point out here is all these inland sites. And you're probably thinking, how are they getting nurdles up there? Well, remember I talked to you about railroads. So these are along railroads. That dot is over in West Texas, that's Alpine. And I did a survey out there in Christmas, and I found like 46 nurdles in a 10-minute period along the railroad out there. And then up near Dallas, they find them outside of the manufacturing site of the plastic companies. There's a number of plastic manufacturers up there, but then they also find them downstream and then in the lakes, the lakes that are downstream from those facilities. And that's their drinking water up there. where they're finding those. Okay, so let's zoom in to where we're finding the highest concentrations. Mississippi River, they were after that spill, they were finding 250,000 in 10 minutes. So they were picking up by their hand, they were filling up 5-gallon buckets. That tells you how thick the nurdles were. But spills aside, just normal every day, Galveston Bay is where you're going to find the highest concentration of nurdles. And so it's not uncommon to find 400 to 500 in 10 minutes. And so what you see here is Galveston Bay. And you'll notice if you look at where Houston is, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but Houston is way up here. You might be thinking, man, you know, how are you getting them up there? Well, the Inner Harbor industrial area goes all down this channel here, and there's plastic manufacturing sites along the entire way. And so it starts here. It's called Buffalo Bayou, and then you can find them. And the reason you don't find any in this area right here, there's kind of a blank spot from where it says Houston to going over to Baytown, is because of access. You know, it's all industrial area, it's all fenced off, and it's bulkheaded. And so, you know, it makes it really hard to go up and try to figure out where all these nurdles are coming from because there's no access into there. And the only way to be able to figure out who made these nurdles, well, there's a few ways. One is you can find it directly outside their fence line or where they're discharging. That's one way. But if there's a bunch of manufacturers in one spot, it makes it hard. If you only the companies can tell you whether they made the nurdle or not. So based on shape and size alone, they can tell you because of the extrusion process that they do. And then they can also tell you by the chemical makeup of it. And this is all from a local company here, manufacturer that I've talked to here around Corpus Christi, who's been a good sounding board. So let's zoom in here to Matagorda Bay and Lavaca Bay, because that's probably where y'all are most interested in. You can see there's kind of little dots all over the place here. The highest concentration that's been found, of course, is around the stormwater discharge of Formosa, which is Cox Creek. There's been a number of surveys there that have been, over 1,000 in 10 minutes. But I've done quite a few surveys along the bay over here. And sometimes you find high concentrations, sometimes they're low. And so, I mean, luckily it's not as high as what's in Cox's Creek. But one of the interesting things I think is interesting is like Karankawa Bay. You know, there's a boat ramp right up here off of 35 that I've stopped at. And there's nurdles up there all around the boat ramps are real good places to be able to get to because, this place in particular has a bunch of marsh all around it. And so the boat ramp allows you to just go down, look at the water line easily. And so there's nurdles there. Same with over here in Palacios. There's a couple access points that I've been able to get to over there. And then up here, Diane Wilson, and I thought she might call in today, but she was able, I guess she kayaked up here or something, but she was able to get up into here and get some out nurdle surveys. Now you'll see some also that aren't along really railroad lines, but they're kind of in the middle of nowhere. But if you see this red dot over here, this is Lyondell Basel, and this is at their stormwater. So they had a couple of hundred in a 10-minute period. If you get there's a number of other manufacturers around that. I've yet to be at a manufacturing site outside of their fence line where their stormwater goes to and not find plastic pellets. So it seems to be a common theme. Zoom in a little more here. This is really just to kind of show you Formosa over here and the high concentration compared to other places around the bay. And if you look here, the cool thing about this map, it's like a Google Earth type platform when you're on the nurdlepatrol.org. So you can zoom in right to your house if you wanted to. But the other thing is you can click on the color-coded dot and it'll tell you all the metadata. So it'll tell you, location, where it was at, latitude, longitude, how many were collected, how many volunteers. And that's important because, if I was able to scroll, this is a screenshot, so I can't really scroll this down, but amount collected, the standardized amount collected right here, if there were 2 volunteers, it would, and they did the survey for 10 minutes, it would divide the standardized amount by 2. So, the standardized amount would be 8 because it would divide the amount collected by 2 volunteers. So it'd make it 8. So that's what's good to know about this is you can look at this map and you can compare what's going on in Palacios compared to what's going on in Port Lavaca, to what's going on in San Francisco versus Miami. It's all standardized to where it's comparable. Okay, so railroads. I never tell people to go along railroads because it's dangerous for one. The other is it's illegal to be within 15 foot of a railroad. And so I always tell people, especially if you're here in South Texas, we have harvester ants. So these are researchers here at the university. We were doing a study looking at chemicals being absorbed into onto the nurdles. And so we were collecting 300 nurdles at each location. So we went up here, we figured out that these harvester ants are bringing the nurdles to their mound. They're not taking them down inside of the mound. They're just putting them out with the other pellets that prevent the vegetation from coming up. And so it's a perfect spot to go look for nurdles. They're doing all the work for you and bringing them to you, So that's them collecting here. We collected over 300 at this site in Woodsboro. But so if you're going to ever do them around nurdle survey around railroads, stay at least 15 feet away from the railroad track. And my suggestion is to find ant mound and watch your toes. Now here's another, because these things are pretty aggressive, these ants. I walked up on an ant mound and then saw all these nurdles around there, and there were actually ants like moving these things around. So I have video and some close-up pictures here. I want to do a study on that someday. Okay, so the latest statistics is we've had over 5,500 volunteers send in information to nurdlepatrol.org so far, with over 12,000 surveys completed at over 5,200 sites. And then we have 152 partner organizations that are involved. And I'm going to show you how to become a partner organization if you want to. We have like a kit that we send out to you. And it's real easy. And then we've got these teacher kits that I'm going to tell you about too, but we've sent out over 1,000 of those. So how are we able to we send all these kits out and we do all this work, and it's all free. And it's due to, for most of plastics, they're paying for it through the consent decree that Diane Wilson and the San Antonio Estuarine Waterkeepers, the lawsuit that they had. And so Nurdle Patrol gets $1 million of that money, 200,000 of it per year for 5 years. And so we're in our 2nd year of it. We're about to start our 3rd year on June 1st. But we do a few things. One is we host a Texas Plastic Pollution Symposium that we bring researchers in all around the state that are working on plastics in the environment, and try to figure out how we can collaborate together and then what the next steps in research ought to be in Texas. And we just finished that up on March 31st. We also recorded the whole thing, so you can watch all 6 hours of these research presentations if you want. I don't know. You might want to drink a Red Bull whenever you're watching that. Stay awake. But there are some really good presentations, and there's a lot of good research going on in Texas, which I think is pretty neat. Some of it even funded from this, the Matagorda Bay Mitigation Trust, which is where the money from the settlement went. We also created a Nurdle Patrol app, so you can just download, or you can currently you can put your survey in that app, but starting next month, you're going to be able to have all the data available right in the palm of your hand in that app, which would be really good. So it'll be in the map form, so you can zoom in to Port Lavaca and say, oh, where have they sampled? I want to sample here. we create a bunch of educational videos. I'm going to get into detail about the startup kits and Nerdle kits. And then we do billboards. And actually, we just got a billboard up in front of Formosa in Point Comfort. And it says, help fight plastic pollution. We put these up around the state in areas that are near plastic manufacturing sites for the communities that live near there, so that they know, if they know there's a pollution issue, they want to get involved. That it's kind of there for information for them. And it was very hard getting that one in Point Comfort. There's only 6 billboards in Point Comfort, and they hardly ever come up. So it actually took us about 1.5 years to get that billboard. So I'm not letting that one go. Okay, so here's the app I told you about. When you first download the app, it's called Nerdle Patrol, and you can get it, if you have Android or iPhone app. But the first time you do it, you have to create a profile. So you got to put your name, probably email, stuff like that. But then you don't have to do that ever again. So the next time you go and you use it, it literally takes like 5 seconds to put your survey in there. It's super helpful if you're doing a lot of surveys. Startup kits. So we wanted to try to get other organizations to start up their own Nerdle Patrol without any influence from the university. And so everything that we have in this kit is logo free, except for the nerdlepatrol.org app. We wanted organizations to, get their community involved. And so we have 100 glass sampling vials. We've got tweezers. We've got about 25 informational cards we put in there. We put some fun stuff like t-shirts and buffs. But then we also have a flash drive in there, and that flash drive has this presentation on there. It's got a bunch of other things that organizations can use to present what the problem is and how people can get involved. And then there's a blank space for them to put their logo on it, so they can make it their own. But it all comes in this nice duffel bag. The only criteria to get one of these is you got to commit to doing 1 10-minute survey a month, and you got to send us your logo. And so if you want one of these, if y'all are involved either in this organization or another one, and y'all want one of these kits, you go to our homepage on nerdlepatrol.org, and there's a link for free Nerdle Patrol startup kit. We have something similar for teachers. Teachers were like, well, we live inland and we're not going to take our students to go out to do a survey, but we want to teach them about how plastics get into the ocean. What are the impacts? And then, what are people doing about it? And so we created this curriculum. It's K through 12. And so it's any groups can use it. And the teachers put their students into 6 different groups. And so you can see these vials of Nerdles that we send to them. They get together and they talk about, how plastics get into the environment, how they get into the ocean, and then they develop the solutions. So they're in their little working groups, they develop. So, next generation of students are hopefully coming up with what's going to solve the problems, But this is also available on our homepage. If you know any teachers that, want a free kit, tell them just go in there, fill out that form. And there's no criteria for that. They just need to be a teacher, and we send it to them. This is a map of where we've sent the teacher kits and the startup kits. And so you can tell it's all over the US. And so if you know somebody in a state that might want one that you don't see on here, send it to them. So what can be done? That's the big question. Well, we think that stricter stormwater permits is a very good start. And so, the good thing about the Formosa lawsuit, one of the great things was not only the money that Diane Wilson was able to put back into the community for doing restoration projects, research projects, and stuff like that, but also Formosa agreed to this having 0 plastic pellet loss into their permit. It sort of set the stage for what other manufacturers around the state ought to do. And this is what gets at that. And TCEQ, the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, is having a public meeting on May 2nd up in Austin and they're changing the language in their water quality standards, which will then trickle down to like permits and things like that. They actually, in last August, they actually made some modifications to their general permit that that enhanced the plastic pellet loss language. So we believe it should say zero plastic pellet loss, and that's what we're shooting for. But there also needs to be steep fines and swift enforcement. Need to make sure that these facilities have best management practices in place, as simple as like this little blue bucket right here, or some other catchments. There stuff like that. And there's a lot of other high dollar engineering that needs to go on at some of these facilities, because a lot of them that were built in the 70s and 80s, they weren't built to keep these nurdles on site. And so that's part of the problem Formosa's having right now, and they're having to do something like $30 million worth of engineering on site to keep these plastic pellets on the property. Another thing that could be done is categorize the nurdles as hazardous material, like the category 2 waste, because then right now the waste is the same as like rock or something like that. So they don't have to specify how much of the plastic they're throwing out or where. And so that would be big. And then create the circular economy is kind of the ultimate goal of, we shouldn't be manufacturing things that can't be recycled or reused, which right now we do. We make a lot of stuff that cannot be, it's just thrown away. So the Surfrider Foundation created this bill, and it got a state representative here in Corpus Christi named Todd Hunter. He's a Republican, to author a bill to try to get the zero plastic pellet language into general permits, plus all the stuff about fines and stuff like that. So we have this available on our website if you wanted to look at the language. It was filed in January or March of 2021, and it didn't make it through. It's considered an interim study now, so we're supposed to be working with TCEQ on what the next steps are. But we're going to reintroduce this bill again this next legislative session. This bill is on our solutions page, and so you can download it. And we want other states to look and see what we're doing. We first tell them, gather as much information as you can, show that there's a problem, or if there's not a problem, don't worry about it. But if there is a problem, you got to put it in the nodal patrol so that you visually see the problem and where it's coming from. Then download this bill, change it from Texas to whatever your state is, and then you've got something going. Now we also have interns, and we've had interns that are not even in Texas. This one in particular, Lisa Scobell, she was up in Wisconsin, and she wanted to do something for Nurdle Patrol. So we had her make contacts with 15 organizations along the Mississippi River, which there's a big problem with nurdles in the Mississippi River because it drains 41% of the US, and there's a lot of manufacturing, transportation, distribution, all kinds of stuff handling nurdles in this area. So she worked for us doing that. I've got a couple of interns that are going to be working for me this summer, so we're going to see what we can get them to do. Our future plans are, we want to be able to study consumption of plastics and birds. Nurdles, of course, would be a part of that. With our rehab facility that I told you about with turtles, we also rehab birds, about 1,000 birds a year. Our rate of success with the birds is about 50%. So about 500 of them don't make it. And out of those 500, about 200 of them die within the first 24 hours. So those are key ones that we could look at plastic consumption. And so that's something that we're proposing this next year. We also have a 4-part film series that'll be coming out next month of Diane Wilson. And the first series, or the first episode, is about her growing up. And then the second one is her fight with Formosa. The second one is her work with Nurdle Patrol. And then the fourth is the future, what she's doing in the future. And so that'll be real good. We've already finished 2 of those. We've filmed all 4 of them, but our videographer guy is putting the other 2 together. We also went to a Great River Road Nurdle expedition all the way down the Mississippi River using barges and vehicle and try to sample all the way down. And then we're doing some other revamping of websites and stuff like that. But we got a couple tools. One is the Facebook page. If you're interested, get on there. There's a lot of folks that they post almost on a daily basis of different Nurdle stuff going on around the country and the world. And then, of course, our website there has a news page, and there's a lot of good information on there. We also have a YouTube channel, Mission Aransas. We have a whole series of Nurdle videos on there. We also do beach combing stuff, stuff washing up on the beach. But the Nurdles is a big one that we have a playlist for. And then this was the other expedition that we did. It was called the Gulf Nurdle Expedition, and we went to every accessible point along the Gulf of Mexico in the U.S. from Corpus Christi all the way down to Key West in a 10-day period, collecting Nurdles the whole way, and meeting with organizations every single day, and giving them a presentation, and then going out and doing Nurdle surveys with them. And so we wanted, this is a documentary that came out, and it's about 18 minutes long, but it's on our homepage as well. It's entertaining and informative. And so if you have 18 minutes, I'd suggest go check that out. And then ultimately, at the end of the day, what are we doing this for? These are my kids, Jack and Parker, and they ought to be out there picking up seashells and not plastic pellets. And so, we know there's a problem. The industry knows there's a problem. I've had many conversations with them, and they want to do better than what they've done in the past. And so there's real positivity, I think, moving forward. But ultimately, we're doing it for the next generation, because these things are not breaking down within 100 years. This is a decades long problem that is not going away. It's just accumulating. So we do it for the next generation, so their great grandkids don't have to deal with it. And with that, thanks, and I'll take any questions.